While you were a lawyer, did you feel like people treated you less because you were a woman, like in your law firm?
I think I was really, really lucky in my law firm because they were very nice to me. The first time I ever came across any sexism actually it was before I went to my law firm. And I went out to dinner at somebody's club with some people who were older than my parents. And because I was very well brought up, I got there early so I wouldn't keep them waiting. And I sat in the lobby of the club, but I didn't know it was a men-only club for men members. And although women were allowed to come to dinner, they were not allowed to sit in the lobby. And so the doorman came and told me I could go sit in the waiting room of the ladies' bathroom, which I did. But that was the first time I had ever come across any real sexist approach to things. Back on Tuesday, and we have a whole new group of young lawyers who've arrived whom I haven't met. And I'm there early in the morning, and I go into the coffee room, and this young man comes in. I don't recognize him, so I think maybe he's a client, but I don't know. And he asked me if I could make him coffee, because he thinks I'm a secretary. And so I said sure, and I made coffee. And we both had our coffee and we went our separate ways. And that afternoon, a very red-faced young man arrives in my doorway because he realizes that he's made the dreadful assumption that the managing partner is a secretary who will make him coffee. And he apologized profusely, and we became best of friends. But I came home and told my sons, one of whom is Issa's daddy, that you never, ever, ever make assumptions. And just because a woman walks in, you don't assume in a business setting that that woman is a secretary and is there just to take care of you. The numbers of women going to law school, when I went to law school, I think there were 8 women in a class of 250.
Wow.
Now the percentages are close to 50-50, but what happens after that is that a lot of women, particularly in law firms or in corporate departments, get to a certain level and they don't go any further. And so still the leadership roles in most corporations and most law firms are largely male. I think in our law firm now we have about 30% women partners.
Wow.
Which isn't bad, but it's not 50-50.
Yeah, it should be.
Mixed issue.
Okay, so I went over this in the beginning, so you are not a Jew, but you married a Jew who is my grandfather, and was there any conflict, I already know this, but was there any conflict between your parents or people around you that didn't want you to get married because he was a Jew, like anti-Semitism or anything like that?
Again, I think my family was pretty good on these issues. It sounds very trite. We had a lot of Jewish friends and no one ever talked about the fact they were Jewish friends and we weren't. My mother was no longer alive when I got engaged to your grandfather, and my father seemed to cope with it fine. The only thing he did was to warn your grandfather that I was very strong-willed, and he hoped he knew what he was getting into. I did have a godmother who was married to a very conservative Russian who fought in the Russian army, and they were appalled that I was going to marry someone that was Jewish. And in fact, they told me that if I did, I'd end up living on the Jewish Upper West Side, which in fact I did end up living on the Jewish Upper West Side and survived it. And they suggested that they send me away for a year to Europe, and maybe I'd get over this.
Oh my
It meant that we didn't talk to them much for quite a long time. And then they realized that we were very happy, and they became very good friends again. But there was there were a few awkward years in there. And I think they wouldn't have been so strongly concerned if my mother had been alive, but I think they felt sort of responsible for me. your grandfather and I, neither of us being particularly religious, had any difficulty at all.
Yeah.
And in fact, when your father and uncle were little, we pretty much celebrated all the holidays.